My first couple of weeks doing hospital chaplaincy in seminary, I have to tell you that I was a complete wreck. I had no idea what to say as I entered patients' rooms besides, "Hi, I'm Alex, I'm a chaplain," and then wasn't quite sure what comes next, just hoping that the Holy Spirit would somehow guide the next 20 or so minutes. I wasn't even sure on what my goal was as I entered each room. I kept thinking that for each patient and family member I interacted with, I must do something for them. I must fix something for them. I must accomplish something. I must say, well, I changed this big part of their life. I thought I must say a prayer in just the perfect way that I could make God heal them, or that I could fix some big relationship problem that they were having, or get them to give up a bad habit or addiction or change their life forever in this 20 to 30-minute conversation that we had. I thought it was my job how to tell them how to make the right decision. I kept thinking my job was to do something for these patients and family members, to solve something for them, to bring about some magical answer or solution. A couple of weeks in, I think my supervisor could see the anxiety on me. And so she called me into her office one day to sit and talk. And during that conversation, she asked, "How are you doing?" And at first I said, "Well, great. Yeah, everything's fine." And as the conversation went, I started to be a little bit more honest and actually say, "Well, really, I'm at a loss." And I asked her, "What am I actually supposed to be doing in these patient rooms?" Maybe that's a question I should have asked the very first day I was there, but a couple weeks in, I finally got the bravery to ask that question. What am I supposed to be doing in these rooms? What is it that I can do for them, or solve for them, or fix for them? My supervisor, far wiser and far, far less anxious than I was in this moment, took a moment of silence, not for her, but so that I could breathe and be still for a second. And then she said back, "Why do you, Alex, think you need to do something for them?" I was puzzled by this question. Because it's my job this summer, of course. Because I have a hospital badge on. Because why else would I be nervously going around this hospital, entering room by room, introducing myself? I must be doing that to fix something or solve something or do something to forever change their lives, right? I must be accomplishing something. For the rest of that conversation and for the rest of that summer, my supervisor pushed back on what I thought was this basic assumption about my job and really basic assumption about my calling in Christ. I thought my calling was always to do something, to fix something, to accomplish something. Instead, my supervisor encouraged me to see things differently. That my calling isn't always to do something, but instead to be someone. To be someone who cares. To be someone who listens. To be someone who is able to be present with people in their most joyful of life moments, but also most horrific and tragic of life moments too. To be someone who doesn't bring their own fear and anxiety into the room, but is able to offer non-anxious presence and to simply be with people and help carry that heavy load that they are carrying right now. To be someone, maybe the only one they're going to interact with in the hospital without an agenda, without manipulation, without a time crunch. Someone who can simply be there and listen to them and offer a loving, caring presence. To be someone who is okay with simply being. That's hard for me. I'm still growing and learning in that, and probably for some of you that still sounds a little bit odd because, to be honest, we live in a culture that makes that odd. We live in a society that's all about being very busy. We run from one thing to the next. We think if we're not busy, not stressed out, not anxious about what comes next, then we are doing something wrong. We've missed something. We're being lazy. And in that feeling, we have forgotten a core part of who we are in Jesus Christ. We've forgotten that our calling is not just to do, but it's often simply to be present with others, to share in holy moments, to not rush on to what is next, but to let people know that they matter, that their time matters, and that it's a gift to simply be with them. My wife Hannah often talks about a trip she did in college. It was a medical mission trip with her church to Malawi. And she speaks not so much about what she did or accomplished during that trip, but what she witnessed in the people of that community. She quickly noticed that at any worship service or gathering or meeting, that people were always late. And at first, this was a little bit frustrating to her. But then she realized the reason they were late was how they saw time was different than us. That instead of always rushing to what's next, that if they were walking down the road and saw a friend or family member or neighbor, that they couldn't just walk on right by them. That they had to stop and say hello. And usually this would then lead to a long conversation and chatting and maybe sharing in food and going into their homes. And that this was something they so valued and prized was these relationships. That whatever was the next accomplishment, the next job could wait because this relationship, this time with this person, that's what matters most. Hannah said, and I believe her, that we could learn a little bit, at least from this. That maybe our culture, our place, our communities, our families and friendships, our neighborhoods could be a little bit better if we practiced a little bit more of that ourselves. And I know when I think of the communities of faith that have been a support and light for me over the years, it's not always because they do so much or are so busy or active, but it's often been that I get to simply be with the people of those communities. I get time to sit and have conversations about faith with either mentors or campus ministers or maybe even youth and students now. Or it's times when I've been invited to people's homes and share dinner or lunch or simply talk over coffee and get to know that person and been blessed in that moment. I know the times when I've been most lifted up and surrounded by love and care is when people are present, whether it's with worship or small groups or simple gatherings over a bonfire, where we don't have big agendas, but we're just so excited to see one another and be in that same shared space. We're reminded this week of members here at Stonehouse like Billy Huff. Billy made her home a welcome space for so many families here in the church, inviting each one over to dinner, kind of going around and getting to know them, knowing that that was a huge gift and blessing. We're reminded of Ruth Lowe, who welcomed me regularly with joy and warmth into her living room when she could no longer come into this worship space because of her health. And each time I'd come, she'd bake some cookies and sit in her couch and just make so much time and attention for me as we'd see the beautiful birds out of her back window. We're reminded, especially this week, of Roger Comley, who every time I simply said hello to in our sanctuary space, he turned around with a face lit up with so much joy and warmth and excitement that I would simply say hello to him, that I felt so valued and worthy. And I know I'm not alone with that all who would go up to him and say hello and worship felt like they were the only one in the room with him that time. And for that brief moment of time, they too know that they were so valued and worthy, and that simply that greeting meant so much to Roger. And it's not just with our older members here in the church too, it's with some of our younger members and even children and youth. I can remember visiting the Crane family about a year ago, who have the young boys, Roy and Watson, and Roy being so excited as I came into their home and immediately wanted me to sit down next to him as he wanted to show me all the cool new video games he had and talk about what was going on with school and life, and knowing what a gift and blessing it was that this child knew what it meant just simply to be present with someone and welcome them into your life. When we think about the way Christ shared the gospel, it was in the same way. Jesus taught and healed in front of crowds, but he also made a lot of time for sitting around tables with friends and strangers. He made time for prayer. He made time for going fishing. He made time for long walks with his friends. He made time for listening to questions and private conversations with just 2 or 3. His message of mercy and justice, grace and new life connected so much more with people because they saw it lived out directly in Jesus. They didn't have to just have blind faith that God loved them some point in the future. They saw it here and now and how much Jesus loved them in all the moments Jesus shared with them. And the same was for the early church and apostles too. As Paul went around this Mediterranean world sharing the gospel, he didn't usually just preach one big sermon and then immediately leave that town. Instead, he would stay for days or weeks or even months, and he got to know the people there. He shared his story and testimony, but then he made space for hearing others and being in conversation. And even after leaving those towns, he wrote letters back and forth to see how the people were doing there, to follow up. And he remembered the names and the people and lifted up the ways he saw them doing great things as well. As he writes in our letter today, Paul didn't use trickery or flattery or even greed to share this message, because he knew that people, after a while, they see through these things. Instead, Paul and those early disciples came to people being willing to share not only the gospel and message they knew of Jesus, but also their own very selves, their presence, their lives, and most of all, their time. In this year of 2020, and in this season, there's so much we may feel like we can't control or we can't do the same. There's especially so much we feel like we can't accomplish the same way we did last year. And that's because none of us can. In 2020, during this year of COVID, that list of accomplishments is not going to look like it did a year or two ago. But we can still live out this part of the gospel. We can still offer ourselves. We may not be able to be as busy or accomplish as much. We can still be present with people. We don't have to be busier, but we can be with people. And we can value their time and words and conversation. We can be a people of Jesus who offer a ministry of presence. And in doing so, I think that God's love and light shines very brightly in our world. So today, I have two questions for you to reflect upon here in this space, and then if you're able to join over Zoom, to continue the conversation over that. The first question is this: who has blessed you by just being present in your life? I invite you, if you're able, to write that name down and maybe one or two ways that that person blessed you and was present for you. And the second question is this: how can you be present with others in this time of COVID? Maybe it's phone calls or video chats if you're not able to be in person with people. Maybe it's doing outside visits, either with outside gatherings or bonfire or walking in the neighborhood. Maybe it's small groups online and checking with people. Maybe it's visiting those in senior care facilities and sitting even outside their windows and talking with them that way. Whatever way you do, know that in doing so, you are living out the gospel of Jesus Christ. So as Iris comes up and plays our second song, I invite us to take a moment and reflect on these two questions.